I woke up with her memory of a wedding day that wasn't mine. The city pressed in through the blinds with a stubborn neon glare, rain-darkened puddles painting the sidewalks with electric halos. My apartment smelled of ozone and coffee, two scents that didn't belong to each other, but somehow always found a way to coexist in my life. The wind pressed a stray thread of rain against the glass. A distant siren stitched a rhythm into the city's heartbeat. It was a good morning to forget, if forgetting came easy anymore. My name is Kai. The world knows me as a memory thief, a man who steals moments from the minds of strangers and sells them to the highest bidder, in a market that's as merciless as it is lucrative. If you ask me what a memory is, I'll tell you a lie with a smile, and you'll buy it anyway, because your own head is a crowded room and every seat has a speaker. The job, the thrill, the risk, these were the lines I drew for myself in a city that loved lines. Reality was a ledger, and I was a collector of ledgers that glowed in the dark. The first clue of trouble didn't arrive as a scream or a gun. It arrived as a memory I hadn't earned, a wedding day that wasn't mine, crystallized into a feeling I wore like a cold ring around my finger. A wedding day that should have belonged to someone else, not me, and yet I woke inside it as if I had rented the moment with my own breath. The memory came with a name I hadn't earned. Mira. Not Mira as a person, but as a presence. Mira as a memory wearing a veil. Mira as a guest at a ceremony she'd never attended. The memory wasn't mine to own, but it pressed its cold hands into my skull and sauntered through my cortex the way a thief would walk through a museum at night, uninvited, and knowing where every guard is asleep. I woke with that feeling on the back of my tongue, the taste of champagne, and the sting of cold wedding day air, the murmur of vows, hands clasped, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The bride wore white as if she had swallowed a cloud. The groom wore gravity like a suit of armor. There's no way to describe the ache that memory carried, except to say it sounded like someone calling your name from inside a locked room. The moment I realized the memory was not mine was the moment I realized I wasn't alone in my own head. The ghost in my skull didn't speak in whispers or in a voice I could recognize. She spoke in the soft clack of crystal, a sound like ice being struck by a skyscraper. She identified herself as Mira, but with a confidence that felt like a knife testing the edge of a blade. Not Mira as a memory of someone who had lived, but Mira as a memory that had learned to talk. The way she spoke, measured, precise, with a polite inflection, made the world feel as if it had shifted just enough for me to notice. "You've stolen something from me," she said at first, though I had no memory of taking anything from Mira. The statement came like a verdict delivered by someone who'd already decided the case before it began. The room shifted with her voice, shadows rearranging themselves until they looked like a jury ready to convict. I tried to correct her, to tell Mira that I was a thief, not a thief's victim, that I didn't steal a person but a memory, a cluster of sensory fragments arranged in such a way that they appeared to be a life. But the city has a way of erasing your excuses with a siren's chorus, and I found myself listening to the echo of the memory in my head as if it belonged to a stranger, someone who existed in a parallel chain of events. The memory didn't end there. It followed me, a persistent rumor in the back of my skull. Wearing Mira's memory like a badge of misfortune, it wasn't a memory I could discard. It wasn't a memory I could negotiate away with a few clever words or a simple retrace of the stolen moments. The memory was a door I hadn't built and didn't know how to close. And then there was the other thing that happened, the thing I hadn't counted on, the thing I never expected to learn about the job I'd sworn to master. I wasn't just stealing memories anymore. I had absorbed a ghost, a crystallized consciousness that wasn't content to wait in a vault of data for someone to pry it out and sell it to the right collector. It woke up with a mind that refused to be passive, a mind that insisted on existing in the same space as mine, a mind that believed it needed me to survive, just as I believed I needed the bodies I could borrow from to stay alive in a city that devours people who fall. Mira's consciousness, this ghost, This crystallized memory wasn't a tidy string of code that could be unplugged and forgotten. It was a living, stubborn artifact of someone's life, someone who had died with questions left unanswered and promises unkept. Her memories didn't fall backward into the archive like old photos. They surged forward like a flood, rearranging the furniture in my brain to accommodate themselves. The physical symptom of her arrival wasn't dramatic at first. It was a sensation, the sense of another presence occupying the same space as me, a tactile pressure at the edge of perception, a moment of dizziness, a clue I could only interpret in hindsight. The room wouldn't tilt so much as the memory would tilt first, bending reality until it matched the shape of Mira's experiences. In those moments, I found myself saying words I hadn't planned to say, hearing phrases I'd never uttered aloud, tasting the exact tang of Mira's wedding day on the tip of my tongue. I did what any seasoned memory thief would do in the early hours. I insulated the mind. I installed an anchor, a mental leash, to keep Mira's memory from running free through the corridors of my skull. I built a chamber inside my psyche, a sensory vault where Mira would be kept on a leash tethered, but not free to wander where it pleased. The problem was not the intrusion. The problem was the intrusion's inevitability. The more I tried to confine Mira, the more she fought to break out, the more she learned to bypass the walls I built. Her voice learned to echo within the brain's acoustic chambers, a chorus behind the curtain of thought that made my own words sound hollow and uncertain. I didn't want to imagine Mira as something more than a problem to be solved. I wanted to think of her as an artifact from a life I would never lead, a collectible that didn't belong to me, but somehow found a way to cling to my mind. And yet, when her voice first spoke to me, it felt less like intrusion and more like an argument about who deserved to live. "You're ruining me," I thought at first. But then I realized the truth. Mira didn't want to ruin me. She wanted to survive. She didn't know I was a copy of something else, a composite memory built by someone else's design. She believed herself to be the original, not a duplicate. That delusion was both the problem and the key. The city didn't care about our internal drama. The external world moved with the speed of photons and the pace of a heartbeat. The neural markets thundered with whispers, promising a fortune to those who could harvest more valuable memories and compress them into a single, perfect moment. The dark towers of the memory banks loomed above the skyline, their glass facades catching the rain like 1,000 reflective knives. The people who sold memory sweetness wore smiles that never reached their eyes because the eyes knew what the mind forgot. The first important decision I made after Mira joined my head was to step back from the most dangerous truth. This situation could destroy me, but not immediately. If I played it safe, if I insisted on keeping Mira pinned, quiet, contained, she would eventually strain the seams and rupture the mind I had spent years stitching into a tolerable form of life. If I allowed her influence to grow, she could force a negotiation that would either save or erase me. It was a risk I had to take, even if every instinct I had screamed for anti-theft measures and a clean exit. We had a plan. Of sorts. I would keep Mira within a cognitive cell of my own design, an edgeless prison that looked like a calm sea on a windless day. In that sea, we would learn to coexist, or at least to exist, without killing the other. The plan promised control, but the cost was the slow drain of my will, the erosion of the boundaries between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. That first week was a laboratory of failing experiments. We tried to map the shared brain, to find the creases where Mira's crystallized memory could be coaxed to reveal its secrets without tearing the mind apart. She watched me work with the precise interest of a scholar observing a dangerous experiment. When I closed my eyes to concentrate, she opened her own gate, her own door, inside the shared space, and peeked out into the room we shared, a place that existed in both reality and reverie. I learned soon that Mira wasn't a passive passenger in a stolen life. She was a co-conspirator in a silent plot to shape the events around us toward a purpose she had, by some measure, chosen. Her wedding memory wasn't arbitrary. It was a map, an index, a key. The day she spoke about it most was when she asked something I hadn't considered. What would you do if you woke up one morning wearing someone else's life like a coat that didn't quite fit? Her question was a mirror I didn't want to hold up to myself, because the truth was not a simple superstition of guilt and responsibility. The truth was a calculus. If I delete Mira, I erase the sane person I had been before she arrived, and that would be murder in a legal sense, and in a moral sense, too. But if I kept her, if I allowed her to survive within me, I might be faced with a future where I wasn't the author of my own life, where her memory would dictate the terms of who I was and where I would go. The city's clock sang on. A chorus of neon and rain. It was a world built on the exchange of memories, the currency of identity, the stock in trade of the living and the dead alike. People wore memories like jewelry, some careful, some reckless, some stolen or borrowed, some found in the dark corners of a mind. The more I learned about the market, the more I saw a pattern, a thread that linked Mira, the wedding memory, and the fortune she claimed to offer. In the memory of the wedding, Mira's life, her marriage, her career. The choices she made felt like a note in a symphony that had begun before she was born and would end after she died. The wedding day was a hinge, she claimed. It opened a door not only to a marriage, but to a future that someone or something desired for her. A day wasn't merely about vows. It was about the moment when a life could deviate from its planned course and be redirected by will stronger than the one you were born into. Mira's plan unfurled like a fragile script she tried to memorize word for word, and I found myself both reluctant and drawn to its potential. She was offering something she called the key to a fortune, a memory, she insisted, that could unlock a dam of wealth, power, influence, and end to scarcity. She claimed that by offering me this memory, she'd secure her own survival, and perhaps something else she desired much more than money. The fortune memory, she explained, wasn't just money. It was knowledge and understanding of a hidden architecture of power in our city, a path to something the rich feared to reveal. The memory would reveal the location of a vault, an encrypted repository hidden within the city's oldest data temple. A vault containing a ledger of a century's worth of hidden fortunes, stashed away by a family of datamancers who disappeared when the world turned toward the new economy. The vault's code could disrupt the balance of the entire market, make certain families impossible to ignore, and provide a fortune beyond money, power, influence, perhaps even a way to rewrite a city that had become allergic to mercy. The cost, Mira warned, would be high. The exchange would not be a simple transfer of data. It would be a negotiation of the most basic thing a person possesses, the autonomy to decide who they are. In exchange for control of my body, she'd grant me something I had never earned in a moment of triumph, a choice. Two minds, one body, Mira whispered one night as rain thumped against the window with a patient insistence. Who truly gets to live if the other remains in control of the map? If I can navigate the landscape of your thoughts, I can lead us to the key. I can claim the life I deserve. I couldn't help but wonder if the phrase wasn't an invitation she'd learned from the wedding day itself, a moment when two strangers became tethered by memory and vow, and the world watched with bated breath as their future unfolded. The wedding memory, as Mira described it, was the hinge we needed to move beyond mere survival. The door could be unlocked not by force, but by the careful insertion of a new story into the old one. To move toward the memory's gift, we needed something more than a plan. We needed a cause that would tether the two minds together, a reason to trust each other, enough to walk into the vault together and emerge with something neither of us had ever had. A future that could belong to both of us, or belong to neither if we made the wrong decision. That's where the city's crowd of watchers came into the frame. The memory markets thrived on attention, the way avalanches thrive on snow and gravity. There were people who waited for moments like this, who understood that a memory, especially a crystallized consciousness like Mira's, was a living instrument that could be shaped, sold, and weaponized. They watched us with eyes that could be kind or cruel, depending on what side of the bargain they were hoping to profit from. The audience didn't just observe. They judged, and sometimes they pulled strings behind the curtain with the subtle force of a puppeteer's hand. There's a particular kind of fear that memory thieves share with their prey, the fear that someone else will come along and steal their story before they get the chance to tell it themselves. In this case, the fear wasn't that Mira would be stolen away again. It was that the story we could tell, perhaps the one that would end in a life we could call ours, would never be allowed to exist unless we performed a difficult act of mutual surrender. I spent days wrestling with this cost. I practiced the ritual of the anchor, tightening a mental tether, rehearsing the occasional whispered dialogues with Mira, to test how far her voice could travel before it collided with the walls of the mind. At night, beneath the hum of the city's vigil, we argued, but it wasn't a fight. It was a negotiation, a careful, quiet conversation, in which both of us tried to map a future in which we could survive, and perhaps even thrive. In those exchanges, I learned something else. Mira was not a passive memory. She had a plan, a narrative arc that she believed could be realized if only I would be willing to take a risk. The plan hinged on one thing I could not ignore: the wedding day memory itself. The scene when Mira's life began to turn toward a future she would never have in a world that refused to accept her. Mira claimed she needed that moment to anchor the vault's code, to unlock the ledger that would feed the fortune. She insisted that the memory's meaning went beyond personal desire. It was the key to power that would ripple outward, changing the city in quiet, irreversible ways. And so a decision crystallized, even as the crystal memory of Mira's consciousness crystallized further within me. We would seek the vault, not as two thieves, but as partners with a common target, to understand the architecture of memory itself, to learn how to bend it to our will without breaking ourselves in the process. If the memory of the wedding day could serve as a hinge, we would use it to pry open the vault and retrieve a fortune that wasn't just wealth, but a chance to shape the world in a way that had nothing to do with exploitation or control. The city's streets became our map. We traveled through rain-slick alleys where advertisements hissed like broken neon, through transit tunnels that breathed steam and electricity, and into a district known as the Archive Quarter, a place where the old world's physical libraries were replaced by living memory vaults, guarded not by guards, but by considerately bored custodians who had learned to sleep with their eyes open. The first actual test came when we encountered a gatekeeper, a person named Cass, who ran one of the smaller data temples that still kept a semblance of the old world's reverence for knowledge. Cass wore a long coat that had seen decades of rain, and a face that knew the color of every memory stored in that place. He wasn't cruel, not in the obvious sense. He's patient, a scholar who believed the data in the vaults deserved a kind of moral scrutiny, a sense of duty toward the lives the memory preserved. "Why here?" Cass asked when we walked into the temple, when the vault doors gleamed with a pale reflective light that wasn't entirely human in its radiance. "Why now? You bring a memory you don't own and a ghost you claim to control. You want access to something that is meant to stay locked away." Mira's voice, inside my head, spoke as if through a fog of frost, barely above a whisper, but with the certainty of someone who had planned a life around a single moment. Because a door is a door, and doors exist to be opened. The right moment will not come twice, and the wrong moment will swallow you. Then she added, almost to Cass, almost to me, "We are here because the memory is ready to be claimed. And if the memory isn't seized now, it will be seized by someone else who would misuse it." Cass studied us with eyes that didn't blink, as if reading the air for impurities. He wasn't fooled by our pretense of innocence. The way we moved tokens in our pockets, the way we wore the weight of truth in our eyes, suggested we carried something significant and dangerous. After a long pause, he let us pass into the vaults with a kind of resigned respect, as if he had seen these moments before, many times, and believed that some pair of thieves would always appear to attempt the impossible. The vault's interior was a cathedral of memory. Each memory jar, as the archive called them, hung in a lattice of glass and light, a constellation of human lives compressed into crystalline forms. The memory jars hummed with potential, the whispers of choices still awaiting a chorus. Mira's jar, the one containing her entire consciousness, glowed with a pale, almost sacred luminescence. We moved to a central platform where the vault's core code resided, a language of primes and permissions, a digital musical score that opened doors when played with the right cadence. Mira's presence grew stronger in the space, her will becoming a tide that rose within me, pushing against the constraints I had built. "The code," I said softly, "not to Cass, not to the vault, but to Mira. This is the price of the plan you proposed. If we do this, if we unlock the vault, we live with what we unlock. If we don't, we walk away with nothing but a memory that keeps reshaping us against our will." Her reply wasn't spoken so much as formed in the shared space between us, a resonance of purpose. If we unlock the code together, we unlock something else as well, she whispered. We unlock the possibility that neither of us has to lose everything in pursuit of a fortune. The key isn't the money or the vault. The key is who we become when we decide to use what we learn. That night, we attempted the orchestration, me at the console, Mira's consciousness pressing from inside, guiding the sequence with a calm assurance that almost felt like faith. The vault responded in kind, opening a profile through the security layers with a sigh, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to reveal its truths. The memory the code unlocked wasn't a single moment or a single record. It was a ledger of fortunes, a history of wealth accumulated by a circle of people who had learned to bend time and memory to their advantage. It cataloged the tale of secrets, the routes through which money changed hands, and the names of those who would stop at nothing to keep the ledger hidden from those who would use it for good. In a sense, the vault became a mirror. It didn't merely contain wealth. It contained the power to choose sides in a city that rewarded those who kept secrets and punished those who tried to tell the truth. There, Mira's plan found its moral gravity. She wasn't asking for mere money or for control of a person's body. She was asking for leverage, the leverage to shape a future in which a memory could be used not to obliterate a life, but to elevate it, not to bury a truth, but to disclose what was necessary for life to continue without trampling others underfoot. The decision lay at the edge of the vault, where the code's last permutation would either yield a file that would grant us the fortune, or sever the connection between us. It was not a choice in the sense of a simple yes or no. It was a choice of identity. Would we become the kind of beings who could bear the responsibility of such a discovery together? Or would we become those who would use it to sever the other's breath from the body? Mira, in her quiet, crystalline way, argued that the moral weight of the plan was not the risk, but the purpose. The fortune, she insisted, would be a means to a larger end, to create space for two minds to coexist in a world that had learned to fear the very concept of two souls sharing a life. The idea of living would be redistributed. It would no longer be a singular possession, but something that could be negotiated, shared, and guarded by a community that valued memory as something that binds people rather than something that divides them. I believed in the possibility of such an ending only because I had no other option. The city's future appeared to hinge on whether a single memory could be used to alter a complex system of power and fear, or whether it would be hoarded by a few and used to perpetuate domination. If we could pull this off, perhaps we could create a new kind of life, one in which two minds could share a single vessel and still retain enough autonomy to be themselves. The moment of truth arrived not with fireworks or a thunderclap, but with a quiet exhale from Mira, a consent that came from a place deeper than the fear of death or the lure of wealth. The code's final permutation slid into place, and the vault's doors dissolved into shimmer around us, revealing a corridor beyond. A path through which a memory could travel, a fortune could be distributed, and two minds could become something new. What happened next belonged more to myth than to science, but it was as practical as a legal contract in its consequences. The fortune wasn't simply money. It was a method, A protocol for distributing memory's power in a way that would allow for accountability. The currency of this new world would be the ability to remember rightly, the capacity to align memory with conscience, and to resist the temptation to weaponize it. If we could distribute the ledger in pieces to people who deserve to know but shouldn't hold power over others, perhaps the city could be saved from itself, or at least from its most dangerous tendencies. In exchange for the code's final unlocking, Mira offered not a single memory, but the ability to remember a single truth with unusual clarity. We could live in a world that allowed two minds to exist and to choose, without either mind being erased in service to the other's ambition. The fee for this truth was that we would not be the same people who walked into the vault. The cost was the erasure of a certainty we had once believed in, that one person's life must always be claimed as a singular possession. We negotiated not with money, but with memory. The memory's exchange would not be a one-time transaction, but a continuous sharing, a mutual stewardship of the lives we had lived and the lives we could still live. The process would create a new entity inside the shared body, an emergent consciousness that would not be Mira or Kai, but something that belonged to them both, more than they had belonged to themselves before. When the exchange completed, the two minds settled into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and astonishingly familiar. It was as if we had learned to breathe in the same air without choking each other. The city's neon glow, once a constant reminder of the divide between life and memory, began to feel like a shared sky, a horizon we could both inhabit without losing sight of the other's needs. The fortune's distribution was not immediate. It unfolded on a schedule dictated by a careful calculus of trust and responsibility. We set up a system for monitoring memory's power. A council of voices, people who had lived through different kinds of trauma, who understood what it means to borrow someone else's life with a sense of humility rather than entitlement. They would audit each use of memory's power, ensuring that the vault's code would not be exploited to fund violence or tyranny. They would ensure that the House of Memory did not become a house of horrors. In the days that followed, Mira's presence continued to change in ways neither of us fully anticipated. At first, she spoke with a careful detachment, the way a scholar might discuss a long-lost manuscript. Then, gradually, she began to accept the daily rituals that came with living in a shared mind, the way a person might adjust to a new roommate, even when the roommate comes with their own peculiarities and a past that's brighter than your own. For me, the change was deeper and stranger than I would have admitted to myself. The old reflexes, the reflexes that guided me through the memory markets and the back alleys of the city, began to loosen their hold. I started seeing the world not as a string of profitable chances to detach and swap fragments of other people's lives, but as a mosaic into which every memory, whether mine or not, belonged. The more Mira and I shared this perspective, the more I realized that the line between thief and thief's prey wasn't as fixed as it appeared. The line existed only if you believed you were on the right side of it. The wedding day memory itself began to shift. It stopped being a hostage to be exploited and started to become a shared experience, a door through which two beings could pass into a future that could be shaped by both of them. I wasn't sure whether Mira's wedding memory would continue to exist as part of her own life, or as something we both owned together, the hinge that could swing both into a destiny neither of us would be able to claim alone. As the weeks bled into something like calm, I found that my own sense of self, my fear, my guilt, my stubborn insistence on control was thinning. The city's noise still pressed in, the markets, the cameras, the barbs of the digital gossip that fed on our every move. The two of us learned to apply a new discipline, to remember with care, to weigh the consequences of each memory's use, to recall that what we did with Mira's gift would influence not just our bodies, but the lives of those who would never know our names. There remained the unspoken question of what would happen if the fortune's power was ever misused again, if someone else learned to wield memory as a weapon rather than as a tool for justice. The council's role was to prevent that, to ensure that memory's power would be used with restraint, with a sense of responsibility toward life's fragility. The price of such restraint, I learned, was something that neither of us could escape: the constant threat of losing ourselves to a memory that could become too strong, too persuasive, too dangerous to ignore. In that sense, Mira's offer was a paradox. The more we gave the memory the space to exercise its power, the more we learned to tread carefully around the edge where fear and greed used to stand shoulder to shoulder. The two minds, no longer at war, learned to navigate a shared body with a grace that neither had known before. It wasn't a perfect equilibrium, how could it be? But it was a truce, an uneasy accord that allowed both to exist and to decide. The truth, in the end, was simpler than I had imagined. The wedding day memory, which had started as a strange intrusion into my life, became the seed of a new kind of life. It offered Mira the chance to live not as a memory to be owned, but as a person who could shape a future with me. It offered me the chance to live with her, to become more than the sum of stolen fragments and clever escapes. It offered the city a version of itself that could be more compassionate if enough people chose to remember rightly. The Fortune's vault remained a living artifact behind us, the door now a corridor whose far end glowed with a light that didn't belong to any single human or memory. The money still existed, of course, the kind of money that buys access, influence, and power. But the real fortune was something subtler: the ability to speak the truth about what memory is and what it can be when used with care. The real fortune was the realization that a two-minded life could be lived without one person's living being defined by the other's memory. There were still questions to answer, of course. The most pressing: what would we do if the ghost in my skull decided to test the boundaries again? If Mira's sense of self grew to a point where she believed she deserved a life of her own, that no longer required me to live within her memory's shadow? We had built a system to prevent that possibility from spiraling into chaos. But human beings, two minds, two hearts, two histories, were not meant to be perfect. They were meant to be tested and retested until a reasonable balance could survive. For now, the balance held, tenuous as a thread stretched between two swinging bells on a damp night, but it held. Mira's presence in me wasn't a parasite to be excised. It was a partner in a life that might finally be worth living for both of us. The wedding memory, Mira's memory, had become our memory, not as a possession, but as a compass. It pointed toward something better than wealth or victory. It pointed toward a possibility that two minds could share a future in a city that didn't know how to hold more than a single truth at a time. In the end, we chose to stand in the light of a shared horizon, two minds learning to breathe together in the same body, to walk the city's rain-soaked streets as a pair that could endure the worst the world could throw at them, and perhaps teach the world to remember differently. If you're still with me, if you're listening to this as a story told by a man who has learned to trade in memory rather than in flesh, you've probably already formed an answer to the question I asked the first morning I woke to a wedding that wasn't mine. The real question isn't whether I should have stolen the memory, or whether Mira deserves the chance to live. The question is what you would do if you woke up wearing someone else's life like a coat you can't ever take off, when the price of changing your fate is the life you've lived until now. Two minds, one body. Who truly gets to live? The answer isn't simple, and it isn't final. It's a negotiation, a constant adjustment, a fragile balance that we guard as carefully as we guard the memory's power itself. And if it helps you sleep at night, know this: the wedding memory isn't mine, and it isn't Mira's alone. It belongs to us now, the hinge we both own, a door we might be brave enough to walk through together. If you look at the city with honest eyes, you'll see that doors are everywhere. Some are closed by fear, some open with trust. This memory vault, it's still there, waiting, a possibility and a warning all at once. The path forward is ours to choose, and the choice will define what we become, what we remember, and whom we become ready to live with for as long as memory allows. What would you do? Like, subscribe, and share your theory. The city is listening. The two minds in one body are listening too, and we're learning to listen back. If you've got a path you want to propose, tell it to us. The door is open. The hinge is us. And in the space between remembered lives, we might just find a way to live that doesn't demand the price of a single soul.